My name is Victoria. I am a founding member of the OYCR's Youth Advisory Board. It's really nice to meet you guys. But as we get started, I just want to say welcome to the Youth Justice Action webinar series hosted by the Office of Youth and Community Restoration, OYCR. Today's webinar will highlight credible messengers work in California. We have a few announcements today before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the OYCR webinars webpage. And the slides will also be sent in a follow-up email. We welcome you to share your questions and thoughts throughout today's presentation in the chat, and there will be a designated time to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll respond to as many as possible. Today's session has been approved for 1 hour of STC credit and BBS learning credit. To receive credit for attending, you must stay for the duration of the webinar. Educators are encouraged to attend in support of the professional learning expectations outlined in the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, CSTP, Standard 6, Developing as a Professional Educator. Consult your local district leadership to confirm whether participation is approved for professional learning credit. This webinar is not eligible for MCLE credits. Now, as we get into this, I would like to introduce you to our featured speaker today, Clinton Lacey. Clinton Lacey is the president and CEO of Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement, also known as CM3, an organization dedicated to supporting community-rooted mentors who have navigated the justice system themselves and are now driving transformative change for youth justice involved young people across the country. He brings more than 30 years of leadership in juvenile and criminal justice, including serving as director of DC's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services and deputy commissioner at the New York City Department of Probation, where he helped launch some of the earliest credible messenger mentoring programs in the nation. Clinton Lacey is a nationally recognized trainer, facilitator, and keynote speaker on racial disparity, youth development, and reentry, with experience advising justice systems across the U.S. and internationally. So I will pass it over to the amazing Clinton Lacey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that very kind introduction and honored to be here with you all today. Thank you to all of the wonderful team that put this webinar together, to my esteemed colleagues who are part of this presentation, and to the esteemed audience uh, who are participating today. I want to thank my colleague in particular, Kriya Gomez, who was really instrumental in working with me, with us to put together not just this presentation of slides, but the great body of work that will talk about in terms of what's happening in California. So, credible messenger. It's a term that is used very widely, and I think means different things to different people in different contexts. And so I wanted to offer a working definition of how we think of it. And from my travels and conversations and collaborations, hopefully serves as a fair, sort of universal definition. While credible messengers do many different things. And before we close today, I want to talk about the array of opportunities and current ways that credible messengers are impacting young people, families, communities, and also fostering system transformation. The term itself was first applied to the body of work involving impacted people taking leadership roles. To my knowledge, the first time I heard it was from a colleague and elder and mentor, Eddie Ellis, who was an impacted person in New York City who came out of incarceration and while incarcerated, led amazing work, but then came home to continue to lead amazing work at the Center for New Leadership. And he began to utilize that term. So we started using that term to refer to folks who previously we were calling transformative mentors. So there's many names that are used, peace warriors, peacemakers, community mentors. different language, different names, all of which are fine. Credible messenger has taken on quite a bit of momentum as terminology, and so we're using that today to describe a body of work. As you can see here in this slide, we're talking fundamentally when we say credible messengers about people who are rooted in the communities that they serve. I think that's a critical characteristic and aspect of credible messengers, that they know the fabric, that they have relationships in the neighborhoods where they work. They themselves have been impacted by the legal system via incarceration, community supervision. Often that's one of the experiences, but not just incarceration and not necessarily incarceration, while that's a very prominent experience for credible messengers, but other forms of marginalization in communities, such as homelessness and substance abuse, and involved in cycles of violence and incarceration, et cetera, but who have navigated that process, who have navigated a healing, restorative process, and who have made a conscious decision that they are going to be a part of the solution, a part of working with the most marginalized young people, justice-involved young people, and their families and their communities. And they incredible messengers, I think, through the continuum of work, have impact certainly on an individual level with individual young people who are caught in cycles of incarceration and other forms of marginalization, families, communities, but also having an impact systemically. And I think that's important for us to think about and not limit credible messenger to the worst, I think, characterization of it, which some may think of it as something like scared straight or something like that, that it's much more than that. And we're going to talk about that a bit. So, as you can see here, examples of being peacemakers, first responders, and transformative mentors, right, who provide a range of services from violence interruption, intervention, and prevention to ongoing long-term intensive life coaching and intensive mentoring. And so there's a continuum of work of what credible messengers do and where they do it. And so I want to talk a bit about that. And this is true nationally when we talk about credible messenger, but of course, I want to talk, and it's also applies, and it is true of the work that's being done and that continues to develop and grow in California. I think the quote at the bottom of this slide is captures, I think, a core idea. Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, right? And so while this is not like an addiction model, it does certainly relate to the idea of AA or NA, or people who have had the experience have a particular insight and gift and message to bring to help foster transformation. So here are a few of the characteristics that I think I alluded to, but just wanted to, spend a moment to look at and to think about. Again, rooted natural leaders, I would say non-traditional leaders in the way that we may often think about it. But as credible messenger work continues to grow, there is a growing understanding, appreciation, and acknowledgement of the impact that these leaders are having nationally and throughout communities throughout California. Yes, the shared life experiences of incarceration and cycles of violence and other forms of marginalization. Um, but really, what's really key that it's that is a absolutely critical ingredient of an experience that credible messengers bring to the work, right? Understanding it through actual experience and being able to relate and form trusting relationships with young people. But also a very powerful part of the message of credible messengers isn't just to young people, I've been where you are, I've experienced forms of what you're experiencing, and therefore I can help you. Yes, that is a key message, but also a message of their own pathway to healing and restoration and empowerment, and leadership, which they're bringing. And so that I think is an important part of the message when we think of a credible messenger. So as you can see, track records of community service and commitment, consistent presence, This is not 9 to 5 work, right? In fact, as we talk and many of the models that credible messengers engage in, it's 24/7 accessibility and responsivity to young people and families and communities. And of course, the bedrock of it, I think, is these trusting, transformative relationships, which so much of our field struggles, the field of youth development, youth justice, and particularly struggles to form. But of course, the credible messengers are showing us through trusting relationships that transformation can take place on multiple levels. So these are some of the core characteristics that I think are important to think about. You know, my experience, I spent many years working with youth at Rikers Island in New York City and working around the country addressing racial and ethnic disparities throughout youth justice systems, and ended up becoming the Deputy Commissioner of Probation in New York City, where we launched Arch's Transformative Mentoring. Um, and I'll talk a bit about that. So we launched an initiative, the first of its type inside of a probation of a system agency, in fact, but certainly not the first time credible messenger work had been done. Like, this is a historical process that if we look back generations, we see examples of people who were impacted, who took, who went through processes of healing, restoration, and conscious decisions to become leaders and healers and educators and peacemakers in their communities. So that's not a new thing. It's not something that any one person should claim as that they authored it or created it. It's a historical process that we're tapping into, and this has certainly been happening throughout the country and in California for sure. And so, when we think about the roots of credible messenger work, for us, we think about it not then as a new program. It has programmatic aspects to it, which are certainly important to talk about, but it's much more than a program. It really grows out of historical movements and struggles for social justice, for civil rights, right? For human rights. That where we find abuses and disparity, right? And inequity, certainly in the legal system, but in other institutions and aspects of our society. And so the credible messenger work then grows out of all of that, because it's people who have been impacted and marginalized who are now in this unique position to have the impact that credible messengers are having. And California is a rich example of that history. Many movements and organizations that we think about, that we link this work to, in terms of impacted people providing such a positive and impactful engagement and set of relationships and transformative work. A few organizations here that we all know, and this is just some in thinking historically. Have certainly could spend a lot of time talking about both past and present organizations, but some that come to mind, of course, as you can see there, that were led or staffed and centered around the experiences of impacted folks. It, you know, and looking at the mentoring center, which would I include in that, which also was did a lot of work in advancing the idea of transformative mentoring. That mentoring, the transformative mentoring is not your traditional volunteer hour a week with a young person, applying for a job, all of which is wonderful and important and great to provide, but that transformative mentoring is something much deeper, that is deeply rooted in relationship and involvement and in presence and places where many people don't want to go, are afraid to go, or don't know where to go, in terms of reaching our people that and our young folks in particular, who we're most concerned about, who we must reach and serve, and restore and empower. You can see the Young Women's Freedom Center here as one that certainly comes to mind. We've continues to provide really critical leadership throughout the state. And you can read the list for yourselves in these organizations: Healing Dialogues, ARC, Advanced Peace. These are prominent organizations, and there are more, which the folks participating today on this webinar are represented and could speak about. And a body of, community violence intervention, CVI programs, that have emerged, who are doing that frontline violence prevention work. And so there's this huge array of organizations that have history, that have roots, that have proven impact. So I think one of the big points here that I wanted to make is that, ironically, because of mass incarceration and other forms of marginalization in our society and in California in particular, Credible Messenger is a vast, natural resource, right? Um, Credible messengers are here, have been here, and are doing the work, whether that title was used or not. So there's a rich history. There's a rich body of experience and of expertise that is present in California, and the work that we've had the honor to be engaged in, that I'll speak about momentarily, is tapping into that. And I think this historical context is important to understand. Briefly, I would just say that, in terms of emerging evidence and literature and the research, there's emerging work coming out, right? And also through, which is not named here, but which is really emerging now, is, participatory action research. Initiatives where the voice of the people doing the work, the voice of the people being impacted, the voice of the community is being incorporated into these processes of evaluating and better understanding not just if it works, but how it works and why is it having such a powerful impact in communities. The Arches, of course, example in New York City, where the Credible Messengers there through our initiative there, we're able to reduce recidivism by over 60%. In DC, also findings from John Jay that talk about reductions in recidivism, of course, but also strengthening the voice and the relationship of community to be participants in the process, not just hopeful recipients of equitable and effective youth development focused justice, but participants in structuring that and building that and participating in the practice of it, which was part of that work. In Milwaukee, we see that there was reductions in recidivism, particularly looking at what was happening with the correlation between truancy and quote unquote juvenile delinquency, some research there. And in California itself, in Richmond, of course, amazing work with one example of amazing body of work that was done with reducing the worst form of violence, homicides by gun violence, in Richmond. So the evidence is emerging, and it is quite um, clear to practitioners and communities that are being impacted of the importance of the work. Well, OYCR asked CM3, the organization that I founded a few years back, and we've been doing work of developing credible messenger work. Starting in New York at probation, then I became director in Washington, D.C. of Washington, D.C.'s Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, where we oversaw community supervision and two locked facilities, in fact, a detention center and a post-dispositional facility. Um, uh, they so CM3, we formed CM3 out of growing out of that body of work and work nationally to offer support and facilitation and sharing, and convening of credible messengers to help grow the field. And so OYCR brought CM3 in to engage in that process in California. And so we really came to and focused in on a set of core objectives. And so with the broad idea of strengthening and expanding credible messenger work and impact on the most vulnerable population, or among them are young people who are system involved. Both those who are, facing incarceration, those who are in secure facilities, and those who are coming home, and too many places spiraling right back into systems because of huge gaps that Credible Messenger, as we'll discuss, is filling and has the potential to fill at even a greater level. So the first step was then let's convene and speak to credible messengers, to think about advancing the work, building capacity, strengthening opportunities to impact young people and the systems in which they are engaged. Let's start with those conversations. So we engaged in four convenings, which we'll talk about momentarily and share some of the findings from and the voice, in fact, of credible messengers from and four regions of the state who are doing the work. And that work isn't done, the work of raising and gaining voice and listening and learning to folks on the ground doing the work. But I think this has been a great start towards having that conversation, lifting those voices up, and translating that into increased capacity and opportunity for the work. So that was step one. The other core objectives were to then share those experiences and perspectives, vision, impact, and the challenges, of course, right? That credible messengers and credible messenger organizations, et cetera, and that systems, in fact, are facing who are interested or engaged in this work. An overall key objective to build capacity to invest in the build in the capacity of credible messengers and credible messengers organizations to advance, to increase their reach and impact that they're clearly having, but to really take that to new levels, to the level that's needed to reach the young people, our most vulnerable young people who are in need of this support. Um, and to another objective was to advance youth justice policy transformation, right? So in that sense, um, yes, build capacity of credible messengers and organizations to do the work that they do, which we'll talk about momentarily a little bit in a bit more detail. Um, but to look at the culture, assumptions, historical practices, habits, ways in which systems connect to and engage or impact communities, right? So system policy, legislative, agency policy, practice programs, relationship with community, relationships with credible messenger organizations, and to foster a transformed relationship, in fact, that will support and advance the opportunity for these community leaders to have the impact that they can have and need to have. Um, and last but not least, as an objective of our engagement with OYCR through the Credible Messenger Expansion and Sustainability Initiative, was to support the development of a Credible Messenger learning collective, a network, a body, a platform for credible messengers around the state, working locally, regionally, and then on a statewide level together, a place for a capacity to be built, for training to be shared, for strategy to be advanced, and for impact ultimately to increase. And so those were the core objectives of the work that we have been engaged in for a couple of years now in California, and have had the honor to work with many of the folks on this call today and others who are represented. So the four convenings then that we began with, and there's more work to do and more places to go, and we have had conversations in other places, and LA comes to mind. That's not on this list, and other places, but the work certainly isn't done. But again, walked away with a rich set of voices and insights. Central Valley what was a place, and overall 133 credible messengers were convened, 23 in Central Valley. And just a bit about those places, some characteristics in terms of, the rural nature and the impact of poverty and language barriers. The landscape and relationship between community and systems, and the idea of community-led youth justice, right, is a challenge and work that's being led by credible messengers there. But credible messengers are filling serious gaps in service for young people. In the Bay Area, 40 credible messengers were engaged, and the Bay Area, relative to many places, um, significant formal credible messenger infrastructure. Of course, dealing with serious challenges, as you can see here, in terms of gentrification and displacement. Um, but work being done in the Bay Area to really formulate a regional approach. And I think that connects to this idea of a credible messenger collective for the state, in fact. But the Bay Area experience is one where that conversation was already taking place. And in fact, the conversations we tapped into were taking place, but we were honored to be able to create or facilitate a safe space for people to come together to have these urgent conversations. In Santa Cruz, 22 credible messengers were engaged. Of course, key issues around farm worker communities and immigration enforcement pressures and the impact that that's having, which is a whole conversation. But the gaps in service, and really what we see in a history of grassroots collaboration and a cultural emphasis on cultural healing and tapping in, to young people and family and community culture as an approach to engaging and promoting healing, restoration, social justice, and empowerment. San Diego, as we can see here, 48 credible messengers. And this was, as we noted here, the most diverse community of credible messengers. And I would just pause here to say that credible messengers, I think there might be a sort of prototypical, description that comes to mind of a male who's, done significant time in prison and now is home and doing this amazing work. And that is still a prominent profile. But credible messengers are men and women. It's multi-generational. With grandmothers, with grandfathers who are serving as credible messengers, not just to young people, but also to their families and their caregivers. And so I just wanted to make that point and was noticed and observed in San Diego, the significant representation of women as credible messengers. Um, the issue in San Diego, as is seen in other places, is how do we get resources to the ground, not to attack large organizations, but the need to reach credible messengers who are highly concentrated, not in the larger, well-established organizations, but more so in the smaller grassroots organizations. And so these were some of the issues and takeaways from those convenings. Um, Credible messengers spoke extensively about their experiences. One thing that we took away from them was just the description of, credible messengers are essentially are adults, as you can see, clustering, 80% at 25 and up. There are peer credible messenger models or part of the model where we have younger folks who are serving as credible messengers as well. So this is not to discourage or suggest that that's not critical, that younger voice is part of this, not just as recipients of credible messenger service, but as in fact practicing it. But we do see a wealth of folks with significant experience in years in the work. And so if we look at experience again, we'll see that a large number of folks with at least 5 years or more of experience, and really a large number of people with over 10 years of experience. And I think a takeaway from this is like we're talking about folks and we're talking about organizations and we're talking about a movement of people who have really significant years and experiences in this work. And so while it is emerging and may be referred to as new in some senses, it's not. But what is emerging is a more solidification, organizing, formalizing the work in a way that can certainly advance a more collective, well-resourced approach. Um, Credible Messengers gave great feedback on what they were observing as the issues that young folks and their families, of course, were experiencing. And so on the left, this is some feedback in terms of Credible Messengers. So if you, in terms of the percentages, how asking Credible Messengers, how many have seen or heard or observed housing instability as an issue? And 89% of credible messengers of the group we work with said that they had, right? So that's what represents this chart. 76% said, yeah, we've observed employment and jobs and economic issues and so on down the list to behavioral health, court and legal issues, and on down the list. Food, all of these are high percentages of folks who do the work or are saying they're observing these issues. And then more directly, what have been the direct calls from young people and families for what they need, right? What have they prioritized as urgency for them? And we see that the list correlates, right? And not necessarily in the same order of the observation, but certainly in terms of what we see young people need: housing, support, legal representation, not just an attorney in court, but support for families who we know in this nation's youth justice system. And we know each county has their own system, but families are too often marginalized. Parents are marginalized. So support for families to participate in a meaningful way is critical, and that came up. In addition to legal representation in court, I mean, on down the list of employment and behavioral health, and all of these are important. And, none should be, minimized. From food deserts to the intensive life coaching and people being able to get places, and of course, substance abuse and rehab. So all of these are critical issues that credible messengers are encountering and addressing. And so I think then if we could just turn to, based on all of that, of a sort of listing of some of the key issues that our young folks and families and communities are facing, then what are credible messengers' core approaches? And these came together throughout the four regions and in other places where we're having conversation. And in fact, this is correlates with what's happening around the country too, but some certain specific sort of approaches that are key to California, I think, are significantly strong. But trauma-informed care, here, of course, understanding the impact of trauma, particularly on a young person who is still in a developmental phase, right? And the fallout on families and communities, healing-centered, really strength-based work, ensuring that young people, even if we can sort of decriminalize them in terms of stigma, that their new label isn't, traumatized, right? Or severely compromised because of behavioral health issues. And so healing-centered work, really focusing on the strengths and building on that and incorporating that into the work. One of the folks who's was impacted, Dr. Jen Wright, talks about a young person saying, I'm not my trauma, right? I'm not my delinquent act. I'm not my offense, but I'm also not my trauma, right? So credible messengers really embody and focus on a strength-based approach. Various types of developmental rites of passages and culturally rooted programs is a core approach, supporting people through this court and legal process, both in court but inside facilities, and as young people are coming home, and those who are in alternative programs, which I'll mention momentarily as I close, and really tapping into a rich body of practice of healing circles and culturally grounded, rooted work with young people. So these are some of the core approaches that credible messengers are taking. Um, what do credible messengers need? And I'll close in 1 minute, but I just want to say fair compensation. So some organizations are working like with many credible messengers aren't paid, but this is emerging and developing into a body of work. We have teachers, we have firemen, we have, lawyers, we have professions that play critical roles in our society. Credible messenger is such a field, a body of work that's in need of resources, and compensation is one of them. Organizational infrastructure for the organizations, again, who often are grassroots. Training and skill development. Recognition and respect and access to reach young people in, yes, facilities and on probation, but also in schools and in other settings, so that the credible messengers have the access that they need. And then, of course, what can't be forgotten is a built-in type of wellness support for credible messengers, who deal with vicarious trauma, and perhaps literal dangerous situations, right? Like physically dangerous situations. But the type of support that first responders receive is something that credible messengers, these are some of the key needs that were expressed by folks. Um, Really quickly, training, quite a bit of training, and this PowerPoint would be shared. Folks could look at it. Vast training, a really highly trained group of folks, right? Credible messenger organizations with all of the organizational and funding challenges, but still consciously saying we would like more training in some key areas, as you could see there, which is part of the process and part of the work to develop access to those trainings. Key recommendations then go around those needs, from funding to creating the learning collective, the idea of standardization or certification processes, addressing gaps in funding for youth and families that they need to support their actual lives, and of course, increase funding for credible messenger organizations. I would just close now by saying, as I pass it off, um, that um, there's a vast array of ways that credible messengers are working and can work, right? And you see the list here, right? So in the youth justice system continuum, from diversion to reentry, right? But in schools, and least restrictive programs where we see that happening, in health and behavioral health initiatives, and also in workforce and economics. So in every area of life that impact this group of young folks and families, credible messengers have a significant role to play. And happy to, uh, you know, take some time at perhaps some other time. I'm probably out of time now. Questions and answers and comments, but certainly happy and honored to have been part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Clinton. We do have one question, and I think we have time. We're doing pretty well on time, thanks to you. And so I can call it out if you'd like. Is that helpful?
Yes, that would be. Thank
Okay.
you.
Julio asks, what is the process for becoming a credible messenger? And then explains that transitioning and experiencing life and transitioning out of previous lifestyles can be challenging, and people may be still entrenched in their past life and displaying certain negative traits. And so he ends with also, how are they monitored? So I think sort of a two-part question. What's the process and how are they monitored?
Well, different models have their own curriculum. At CM3, we're sharing a curriculum of training and development for credible messengers, which is one offering, and other organizations will help, tap into the natural resources and gifts that credible messengers bring. But things like trauma informed, so training that include things like trauma-informed care and youth development, healing-centered engagement, restorative justice, right? So really taking this field very seriously and pouring into it the array of training and learning opportunities to add to Credible Messengers toolkits. And so we offer a training at CM3. Others do as well. And so I'm happy to talk about that. The last part, which I think is a great question, is sort of relates to what we might call vetting of credible messengers, right? So simply because a person has lived experience does not necessarily make them inclined to, want to, or be ready for the work of being a credible messenger, right? That's part of their experience. The other part of the experience is a process of healing and restoration and conscious intention to be a positive impact in people's lives and to help change systems. And so that kind of vetting is important. We know folks are going to often have legal history, legal charges, et cetera. but the critical vetting is around folks' stability, reliability, community relationships, rootedness, and these are the kinds of things that you want to ensure, and making sure that the people who are doing this work are equipped and supported to do it to the best of their ability and to the service of our young people and communities.
Thanks for that, Clint. And there's one other question I think we can add in here and then transition over to Lisa, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
A great question about youth who are both justice involved and receive special education services. There's a question from Alejandra about whether credible messengers can also be advocates for students with IEPs or special healthcare needs outside of school.
Yeah, thanks, Alejandro, for that question. I think absolutely, and that sort of alludes to one of the last points I was beginning to make in terms of the vast array of ways that credible messages can have impact. Of course, we know the correlation between, special education, truancy, and juvenile detention, right? And we know the correlation between juvenile detention and adult incarceration. So it's like a pipeline, as it has been described by others many times. And so it's critical that credible messengers are part of the process. And many serve as educational advocates and supports to young people and families, and perhaps accessing people who have a particular experience in educational advocacy. But yes, their voice, I think, is critical. And then their co-navigational support, I think, is what's absolutely paramount. So as young people are navigating, seeking just treatment and fair treatment and proper resources, that credible messengers are there to support them through that. So I think education, and particularly that issue around IEPs, is a great example of work that credible messengers, some are doing already, and where I think we could grow.
Okay. Thank you so much, Clint. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise, and we will go ahead and keep it moving and move over to Lisa Tadlock. Lisa?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And Clinton, thank you for sharing your programs and your guidance. I think what you demonstrated is the value that credible messengers bring to our work with youth. And so I'm really pleased to add on, I guess I want to say, to what you described, because I hope I have some answers to some of those questions. So in California, we have built an incredible and robust, I want to say, behavioral health system of care. And there are multiple avenues in which we can outreach to youth and provide services that they need. So for today's presentation, I really want to focus on, you heard Clinton's presentation, and it's like, how do we fund this? I mean, that's always the big question. Like, this sounds so great. Our county could use this. How do we fund it? So I'm really going to focus a lot on how do you fund it? And so first, what I want to do is, for clarification, is I geared this presentation through outreach for our community-based organizations, as well as counties and our county partners in behavioral health, probation, social services, child welfare, etc. In addition, this is a really great opportunity in California for a job creation and a youth pathway to work. And so I wanted to highlight those at the beginning. So when you're listening with that lens. The second piece is our team will be, I'm going to be going through a lot. There's a lot. And so you will get the slides after today's webinar. There are multiple links for resources in that. Our team will be sharing the links in the chat, but if you miss that, and if you're hopefully you're paying attention to the presentation, you missed the link, they will be coming to you through the slides. So I just wanted to let you know there are a couple opportunities to access the resources. So I'm not going to go in, but so the next slide after the cover one. So what are peer support specialists? So in California, what Clinton described is we're looking at people with lived experiences with mental health conditions or substance use barriers or family members of those individuals. In California, and what I'm talking about today is that career path and that, let's say, organization infrastructure, as well as the youth going into this field, is reimbursable through some of our behavioral health initiatives now going on in California. And that's really what I want to focus on today. In California, peer support specialists are also called credible messengers. So you will hear that, I'm going to use the term peer support specialist. And apologies, my name is Lisa Tadlock, and I am with the Health Policy Division with the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. Want to share too, I'm relatively new to the organization, and so my background is actually at the county level and at the CBO level. So I've been in a lot of your shoes in terms of trying to find funding. And so I'm hoping that I can help you navigate some of this. What we found, and what I think Clinton was really clear on, is that credible messengers in the juvenile justice system improve engagement with the youth, reduce recidivism, and connect youth to the behavioral health services. And that's the focus where we're looking on. But I'm going to give you other options. Now, again, for clarity, and as you listen to this, I was a program person, but I never looked at a program without including my fiscal folks. So maybe your fiscal isn't on today, but please include them, because I'm going to talk about braided funding. And I think that that's something that's really important for you to have a clear conversation with them so that we're all talking the same language. Next slide, please. So in California, we have a certification training. So Clinton brought that up in terms of we need certification. So the Mental Health Service Authority, which is MHSA, oversees the certification of peer support specialists. They have the training online. The link is in the title, and the training is free. Now you can do the training online, but there is some additional hours you need to put in. But I want to clarify too that one of the nice things about peer support specialists is that you do not have to have a college degree. Some of the other support services I want to say that you've heard about through a lot of these initiatives, community health workers, certified wellness coaches, we're not talking about those today. We're talking about peer support specialists. So the beauty of that is, they look for people in the training over 18 with the lived experience. So again, it's a great opportunity as a career path for our youth leaving incarceration with that. So I want to, next slide, please. So the certification pathway, this is what's included in the trainings, is, and this is, you have to be certified for your agency to bill for the services, okay? So the person acting as the peer support specialist has to be certified. So again, mentioning what Clinton talked about, some of the core competencies in those trainings are trauma-informed care, recovery coaching, motivational interviewing, youth engagement strategies, cultural humility, and ethics and boundaries. Some counties require credible messenger training. There are some additional specialized modules in the certified or the peer support services modules. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a little bit. So again, there's always this interchanging of the words of peer support and credible messenger training. Next slide, please. So the core partners and the systems partners that typically include peer support specialists are county probation offices, county behavioral health departments, community-based organizations, managed care plans, youth service providers, and schools and reentries. And I heard that in one of the questions in the comments. This is also an opportunity through the Child and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative through schools to also incorporate peer support specialists. I'm not going, though, to cover CYBHI today, but just so you know, there is a linkage to schools. And the goals for these partnerships is to expand youth engagement, reduce detention, connect youth to treatment, and support successful reentry. Next slide, please. So what is, what are and so I pulled up some of the common titles that we hear, and that's why I talk about the interchanging of the term peer support and credible messenger. So you may hear them called youth support, peer support specialists, justice involved peer mentors, credible messengers, or family peer partners. Their typical lived experience background is they're formerly a systems involved youth. They're individuals with recovery experience, and they're young adults who have successfully exited probation. Next slide. So then it's like, where's the best place for credible or peer support specialists to be connected to? And so what we found is in juvenile halls, youth detention alternatives, diversion programs, probation, supervision programs, reentry, community-based youth centers, and they all, the peer support specialists often participate in case staffing meetings, multidisciplinary teams, and wraparound teams. Again, there's a whole body of training around wraparound that you'll be hearing about more, but I'm covering the high level, but all of these connect you to the wraparound. So what, a peer support specialist does that we in California focus on is the engagement, recovery, and life stabilization. So what they will typically do is their engagement and relationship building, recovery support. They're there to walk that journey with the youth in terms of if they're recovering mental health, substance use. They've been there. They're there to support them in that. Life skills development, system navigation. We heard a little bit about that again in Clinton's findings, and then reentry support. Next slide, please. So this is a little blurry, and I apologize. I copied this off of the state website, but the link will be put into the chat, is also in the slides, so you will have that when you get the slides. But just some key highlights is in California to date, or as of, I want to say earlier this week, California has certified 9,379 peer support specialists. Within that category, 114 have done the extra work around the justice involved specialty as part of that training. It does not mean that some of that 9,379 are not participating in the justice involved piece. It just means that those 114 folks have gone through and taken that extra module and added that to their resume. Some counties, as I shared earlier, require that, some will not. So again, but this just gives you kind of this high level. The dashboard also breaks down into age groups. And so I think Clinton hit along that, so I don't want to duplicate what he had said. But it also talks about race and ethnicity, and I think that that's really important because for youth to connect with a credible messenger or peer support specialist, it's also good to have them, and I've heard this, and I apologize, but if I'm using this term wrong, but to have them look like them. So we know that our youth of color are predominantly there's just a lot of, there's very many in the, within our justice system, I want to say. And so if you can have a credible messenger that looks like you, that's been like you, we hear this in the doctors too. So I just want to share that piece. Next slide, please, because I really want to get to the funding. And just so you know, high level, OYCR, we had our RBG plans sent to us earlier this month. And so what we were seeing was a growth in the area of credible messenger partnerships with community-based organizations. And it's showing what we were seeing in these plans was a broader shift towards more of the therapeutic youth-centered environments that emphasize rehabilitation, skill building, and long-term success. Everything that Clinton shared in his slide. So here's the key part I think that a lot of you might be interested in. So how do we fund credible messengers through peer support? So I'm using a braided funding model because there's not one way to fund these. I think the key for you as working in counties or a CBO, it's going to be the bulk of the funding right now for peer support. I'm not saying for the other areas that I talked about, like community health workers and certified wellness coaches, is going to come from your county behavioral health. And right now, county behavioral health agencies are writing their 3-year plan. Hopefully they've included you. If not, please reach out. I highly recommend that if you have not connected with your county behavioral health to do so. They turned in draft plans in March, but the final plans are not due until the end of next month. So where that is in these plans, they need to write, like that's one of their strategies. Like we are going to fund, peer support specialists in our county to do this, this, and this. And so what I also want to share, what I'm hearing from the field is that some counties are being very inclusive in terms of the development of their plan. Some counties are developing their plan and we've had some CBOs reach out to them and have said, and I know we're running out of time, that they will send an RFP as soon as they get the funding. If you are serving multiple counties, some of them had to reach out to the individual counties they work with because each county is developing a different plan. So I want to reach out to your county behavioral health. The other piece is the CalAIM programs. CalAIM does not pay for peer support specialists, but what it does do, and this was brought up, is it pays for the support services that our youth need in terms of transitioning back to their community. And so that could be housing. They can help with housing navigation. They can pay deposits. They now have under BH Connect under this year, 6 months of housing rental assistance. And so as we get those transitioning back to their community stabilized, this is helpful. It also pays for transportation. It can pay for food if they need some food assistance. Then there's the Juvenile Justice Grants and the Mental Health Services Act. Sorry, I'm not going to go in. So I talked about county behavioral health in terms of funding for those. So you can use mental health realignment funds, county general funds, state behavioral health allocations, MHSA, BHSA funds, and federal grants. Next slide. I'm jumped up to the Behavioral Health Services Act 14, slide 14. And so then there's also the workforce piece. So there's that expanded workforce under BHSA. Again, that's a powerful tool to help get people transitioning back to their community's workforce services. I talked about CalAIM, justice-involved reentry contracts. The one I want, here's a blended approach example. So and this is why I say use your finance people. You look at CalAIM, and so you can use your CalAIM dollars, as I said, to help support in the housing, transportation, et cetera. Your county behavioral health can help pay for the peer supports person and their substance use or mental health services. And then there's the probation reentry grant funding. And again, what you write in your plan for that. So that's a real high level blended approach. And I know we are out of time. And so I wanted to hand it over to Mika. And our contact information will be in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And never fear, we will ensure that everybody gets a copy of these slides with all the links for everything that Lisa went through. So thank you so much, Lisa, and we will hand it to Mika to close us out.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mika. I'm part of the Youth Advisory Board. And I want to thank today's speaker, Clinton Lacey and Lisa Tadlock. Please join me in thanking them for their presentation for today's webinar. It was amazing. You guys shared so much important information that can really be utilized in communities. We welcome you to take the survey to provide feedback on your experience in today's webinar, and the link will be found in the chat. This webinar recording will be available on the OYCR website within a week, and the slides will be sent to you on a follow-up email. Also, we'd like to remind everybody that there's a save the date for our 2026 California Youth Justice Summit, Heal the Past, Pave the Future, Watering the Seeds from Voice to Vision. This summit is scheduled for October 5th to 7th, 2026 at the San Diego Marriott La Jolla, and registration details will be coming soon.